rule. Trump said he's...
Look at these boars, they're cheeseburger hogs already. No, they are so perfect. When the Trump administration has unique moments of honesty, well, I guess it's not so unique. They're openly racist usually. And say things like, well, these guys actually are the exact kind of refugees that we want in this country because they are, they're perfectly accepting of American culture. They're not wrong. It's just more so a self-own when you say that. Yeah, they brought in dudes that are virtually indistinguishable from the racist American fat hogs that you see at Walmart on a regular basis. Their opinions also resemble the racist, heart-diseased Amerifats. So it's perfect. It's perfect in that regard, you know? It's an indictment on American culture, not an indictment on anything else.
He's allowing them to come to the United States to escape, quote, genocide.
It's a genocide that's taking place that you people don't want to write about, but it's a terrible thing that's taking place, and farmers are being killed. They happen to be white, but whether they're white or black makes no difference to me, but white farmers are being brutally killed, and their land is being confiscated in South Africa.
On Monday, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa refuted Trump's claims that white people are being persecuted in his country, calling it, quote, a completely false narrative. On Tuesday, Ramaphosa recounted a conversation he'd had with Trump about the situation in his country.
We're the only country on the continent where the colonizers came to stay, and we have never driven them out of our country. So they are staying, and they're making great progress. It's a fringe grouping that does not have a lot of support, that is anti-transformation and anti-change. That would actually prefer to see South Africa going back to apartheid type of policies.
This comes as South African-born Trump advisor and multi-billionaire Elon Musk has also accused South Africa's government of promoting what he calls white genocide. Musk's grandfather moved his family to South Africa after embracing the country's apartheid system.
You don't think this was an Elon request? No, I think it is. It certainly is.
This accusation of white genocide emanating from the White House is a conspiracy theory and a myth that has been floating around echo chambers of right-wing populists and white nationalists for many decades now, particularly within the online space. And it essentially holds the accusation that white South Africans...
This is literally Lauren Southern, narratives that neo-Nazis were trying to advance under the first Trump term have now become official state-sanctioned policy, which of course is incredibly scary in its own right and should not be cast aside. It's just that, like, the impact of said policy is utterly inconsequential, but that doesn't mean that this isn't the state trying to legitimize a completely made up white nationalist conspiracy. And it's particularly insane to do it at a time when the American state is doing a genocide in Gaza. Part of this also, this is twofold. Part of it is to also punish the state that actually called into question America's vehicle of doing genocide in Gaza. South Africa, as you guys know, launched the international criminal justice court case against Israel conducting a genocide. So this is supposed to be like some kind of know you at the global stage from the United States of America, utilizing the influence that the remaining influence that it has on the international stage. But of course, I don't think it's consequential or serious because no one believes this bullshit. The only people that believe this bullshit are motivated to believe this bullshit because they themselves are white nationalists.
Africans, in particular Afrikaans South Africans, are victims of deliberate, direct, state-sanctioned violence. And anyone who lives in this country, who's awake to the reality of this country, the inequality, the poverty, the unemployment that most Black South Africans have to endure, and including Indian and colored South Africans as well, knows that it's patently untrue. And the truth, however, is irrelevant to those who are perpetuating this myth. What matters is that it's a means through which you can mobilize anxiety, mobilize fear, and then appeal to a base within the MAGA movement in the US as well to portray the Donald Trump presidency as essentially being a crusader to defend white civilization, both in the USA and here. And this all began initially with the signing by the president, Ramaphosa, of the Expropriation Act, which essentially changes the criteria through which government can expropriate private property for the public good and for the public use on the basis of finding just and equitable compensation. But for Elon Musk and for Donald Trump, it's doing what right-wing populism, what racial ideologies always function to do, which is to stoke fear, conflict, and division in order to be able to protect the exploitative and unequal relations under South Africa's neoliberal capitalism, and I think under the neoliberal order that we have more broadly.
The biggest L in post-apartheid South Africa was dropping the revolutionary socialist principles that the ANC operated off of that did not engage in restorative justice when it came to the economic inequalities. And these economic inequalities persisted in South Africa, which created a de facto apartheid state from the basis of the improvement of black people's lives in South Africa. There was no economic change. Now, of course, there's reasons for why this didn't happen. Obviously, they were like, come on, we gave you your rights, shut the fuck up. America is no stranger to undermining Reconstruction, considering that they undermine America, the federal government undermined its own efforts of finding a peaceable solution to the system of slavery that exists, this chattel slavery that existed, and very quickly took on efforts to restore the previous racial hierarchies by unleashing the Klan, for example, and destroying any kind of economic restitution opportunities for black people that were newly freed. So a similar issue took place in post-apartheid South Africa.
It was in a 1913 law that gave over 90% of South Africa's land to whites. Today, they are some 7% of the population, white South Africans, but they still own about half, 50% of the country's land. Afrikaners, who constitute the majority of the white population, are among, of course, the most successful and richest in South Africa. So if you could explain, Andile, how has this news, Trump's statement, the fact that these 59 people have now arrived?
Post-apartheid South African conditions for black people and white people resembles America so perfectly, because if I'm not mistaken, I think like every single person that was the wealthiest in South Africa in apartheid South Africa were white, and then post-apartheid South Africa there was one black guy, and then the rest are still white. And the material circumstances of black South Africans did not change. Like, they had more civil liberties, but ultimately they were still living in dire poverty. So all it did was uplift, I guess, one dude, and then that's it. And I don't mean literally only one guy, but it creates this false reality that, the end of the apartheid brought about complete black liberation, where, yeah, sure, some black people were now allowed to be elevated into the capital owning class, and yet the same system of discrimination changed hands from direct de jure discrimination of black people to a de facto discrimination of black people from the point of class.
Actually, these little group of so-called refugees are pawns in a much larger political campaign, a campaign both domestically in the US, where Trump is using them as really as pawns, as props in a campaign that purports to promote whiteness and whiteness under threat, and also geopolitically in his executive order, which granted this refugee status to Afrikaners. It was juxtaposed very closely with criticism of South Africa for taking Israel to the ICJ. So this can clearly...
Dude, it's nuts. Like, I feel like Israeli interests are so pervasive in every orifice of American policy, especially foreign policy. And sometimes I feel like I'm going crazy when analyzing these situations. Like, as I told you, This guy is right. Send ANC to Mars. Elon, thank you, Trump. No to land and property expropriation with their compensation. Please stop legalize racism. Send ANC to Mars.
Also be seen as a message to South Africa to punish them for their stance on Israel and Israel's war on Gaza, and the US